Welcome back to Woman Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda, and we've chosen to have these conversations and videotape them for our listeners to both share information, perceptions, and perspective, but also to encourage our listeners to dare to have these conversations on sensitive topics across racial lines and see what you learn. See how your
Mhm.
heart can open in these ways.
Mhm.
Tonight's topic, Bernadette.
Tonight's topic. So last week's topic was on our previous episode topic was on white grief and mourning the American dream. And so this segment, it seemed appropriate to us. We would talk about Black grief and for many, the American nightmare. So we have two different parallels of experiences in the exact same country and often the exact same communities. And we have not, I don't think, enough made space to have these types of conversations. And so today, that's what we're going to do. Now, I think now, Linda, do you want to share when you came to an awareness that life was life as I experienced it, or as Black people have experienced it, is a totally different dynamic than majority of well-meaning white folks?
Sure, I would be
Mhm,
glad to.
mhm,
It might sound a little ignorant, but I will tell you.
mhm,
Prior to our conversations with Bernadette and Robert and her teenage children,
mhm,
I meant well, but the the difficulties that Black people experience with law enforcement, for example, and sometimes just hate crimes, seemed far away and remote and rather isolated incidences to me, even though meant well. And I was not in a position to argue with anybody, but it seemed like, well, that's far off, sort of like if you read about a flood on the other side of the world. It's like, well, that's too bad, but you don't feel drawn to do anything about it. And after we began to talk in the summer, I realized that these little incidences of active racism are happening to people that I know that live a half a block from me, four houses away. They're happening to her children, they're happening to her husband, they're happening to her multiple ways. I mean, if I'd said, tell me what you can remember from the last 6 months, you would not have had any trouble telling me some of the things that have happened in the last 6 months. I'm betting. And
mhm,
your children were quick to offer experiences that they'd had. These are not the things that make the news. These are the things that Black people live with on a regular basis. And that combined with reading news articles and beginning to read books. The first book I read on this was called White Fragility by a white woman who works across racial lines in work settings. And it's excellent. Robin DiAngelo, White
mhm,
Fragility. But as I began to absorb all that, I was just kind of in shock like, oh, this isn't a flood on the other side of the world that I feel bad about. This is actually happening to people I know and care about on a weekly, if not daily basis. And sometimes it goes really bad and then it makes the headlines. But even when it doesn't go really bad, it's a chronic state of affairs. And I
mhm,
just felt terrible. And I felt like I had been blithely ignoring this for decades when it was actually happening right under my nose. That's maybe not a very glamorous way to say it, but it wasn't
mhm,
that far away. I just pretended like it was that far away. I allowed myself to believe it was far away and rare. And it's
mhm,
not far away and rare. It's right in our communities and it's quite common.
mhm. And I'm glad that you broadened the scope for the conversation because often what we see on the news or what makes media or Facebook or whatever feeds is the most tragic of circumstances or the most drastic examples. The American, quote unquote, American nightmare, there's different layers to it. It is not being qualified for a mortgage when your credit is the same as your white counterpart. It is having your home value depreciated more than your white counterpart because they know a Black person lives there. It is living in an urban area, and so therefore your children do not have access to all the educational opportunities as suburban children do because of redlining and redlining and low property taxes. So the American nightmare, the police part of it is a part of it, but it is just a part of it. There is a whole system of things that has fed into Black people not believing in the American dream. There was maybe 2 or 3 episodes back, we were talking about, that's the one we did on a mother's dream for a child. And I had said to
A
you,
mother's dream for a child, right?
yes, I had said when President Obama had won that first time, it, how as a Black mother, I never thought we had permission to participate in the American dream that fully until he won. And so it is those things that happen in our everyday lives that many people in the dominant culture are absolutely oblivious to. And so all they think the issue is, well, you should have complied with the officer. When that is an issue, but the overarching area of it, and I like that really that people are bringing into the conversation now, especially about student loan debt and how vast majority of student loan debt is directly with people of color, Black people. And it fed the chain. So many are first generation and many come from areas where your home value was low. So you couldn't take out a mortgage to send your child to school and it be paid for. So you go to school, you gain all this debt, you get a job where you're going to earn less than your white counterpart because of systemic racism. So now you have, yes, so you've gotten the job that you're being paid less for, you got the student loan burden to go with it, and then you still have to continue to try and help your family make it through the things that they are dealing with everyday life. So your forward trajectory is always hampered. And people don't recognize that keeps people from moving forward. Being locked out of the ability to own property has caused a significant equity disparity between Black and white Americans. Huge equity disparity. And
Yes.
so, yeah, go ahead.
No, just that Stan this week, my husband is Stan Slaughter, and he works in soil and compost and regenerative issues here in Kansas City area. And the keynote speaker at a Zoom conference he attended this week is Leah Penniman, Penniman or Mann. Soulfire Farms. She's a Black woman. She's also a poet. And she's written a book called Farming While Black. And she hammered home to an audience here in Kansas City. I don't know how large, it was Zoom, that even moving away from slavery, Black people who did manage to get land have had it taken away from them. And he came out of that Zoom session just wide-eyed. And so it was a lot of discussion about the land has been taken away, not just in slavery where it was never given, but even after it was taken away. So the realities of things like the Tulsa massacre and the Wilmington, Delaware massacre, where Black community was self-contained in many ways and thriving. And if you don't know these issues, just look them up. They'll show up in many ways. Wilmington massacre, Wilmington, Delaware, and the
Black Wall Street Journal, the Black Wall Street in Tulsa is the one you're speaking of.
Black Wall Street in Tulsa. It may have been a community named Greenwood, but it's the Tulsa area.
And there was one in Rosewood, Florida as well. That was another self-contained community that was massacred by white people.
Yeah, and some trumped up charge, and then deaths and burning of property and removal of people until until the people lost their property and didn't dare to go back to try to reclaim it. It was never legally taken. It was just stolen. And
Yeah.
so this has happened off and on in big ways and small ways over the centuries.
Yeah.
And so
And
these are
and
those
that
realities. Mhm.
it is. And people love to say, and the good old American saying, well, if you just pull yourself up by your bootstrap. Well,
Right.
you took my damn boot. You burned the boot because you were pissed off that I had made some boots. So I think we also need to recognize that too, because the destruction of communities, especially self-contained Black communities, that were truly a circle within themselves,
Mhm.
as you said, were burned to the ground. People
Right.
murdered over, and it could be something as simple as in Greenwood. It was hearsay. He said something inappropriate to me, and it was truly hearsay.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So there's another thing you mentioned, property, even nowadays. And a few months ago, I read a firsthand account of an educated woman in California who was Black. And I don't have all the numbers in my head now, but in a wealthy community.
Mhm.
And she and her husband got an appraisal on their house, and it was shockingly low. And she could not believe it. And she began to see what else she could do and did some investigation. And a white friend helped her out. They removed all traces of Black family from the home.
Mhm.
And the white friend, and they did get a completely different appraisal, an
Mhm.
appraiser. And the white friend stood in as the
The
homeowner,
property owner.
as the property owner, and the appraisal was, I don't know, like 50 to 70% higher.
Mhm.
And so while I don't have the details of that, if you want to fact check that, you can type in, you can Google search for those sorts of things, and you'll
Yeah.
find the stories are there.
Yes, and typically they say Black homeowners appraisals are about 35% lower than it
Mhm.
would be a white counterpart, especially if it is evident that Black people live in this home. So if you want to sell your home and get the same amount that your white neighbor next door would get, you have to remove all items that show that Black people own this home, and have to ask the white friend to stand in and act as if they're the homeowner. And this is in 2021. That was probably in 2020. But that is still how it goes. Mhm. And so that also adds to the wealth inequity, because now I
Right,
will not have gotten the profit from my home that a white counterpart right next door would have gotten 35% more.
right. Exactly.
Yes.
Precisely. Nor will your children have as much to inherit
Right.
as an equal education
Right.
or equal talent white
Hmm.
person.
Hmm.
So
Or it could even be a less talented white person. Unfortunately, it could even be
yes,
a less talented white person. Hmm.
you're right. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So we
So
want people to go ahead.
well, all I was going to say is part
Hmm.
of my deepening awareness and sensitivity has come because I allowed those things to enter into my consciousness.
Hmm.
And they were shocking and they were not comfortable and they were
Hmm.
painful to acknowledge all this. But I can tell you, as I allow them in, it it inspires me. No, I can't change the whole system, but I do feel more strongly than I ever did like a year or two ago that I have a circle of influence, and it is my responsibility to use that circle of influence, to use my ability to educate myself with facts, and use that circle of influence to make a dent, in the system, poke a
Hmm.
hole in the system, systemic racism.
Yes. Hmm. And I think a lot of that is bringing awareness, having these conversations, and like I said, broadening the scope. It is not just police brutality. That is a part of it, but that is a part of a whole umbrella of things that were designed to keep Black people from equality and equity. It was designed like that on purpose.
Right.
And so that is something that's a hard pill for some well-meaning white folks to swallow. That's a hard pill to swallow. But that's how it was designed.
It
And
is.
so yes, and so we have to acknowledge that this was done on purpose in order for us to create the energy to change it on purpose.
Right, to change it
Mhm.
on purpose.
To
Yeah.
change it on purpose. Yeah.
And while there are still some people who are deeply invested and deeply want systemic racism to change, there are that don't want it to change, deeply
Mhm.
embedded and don't want it to change. There are probably literally millions of people that just simply don't understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And those are the people that we hope to reach. It is
Yes.
happening, and it's
Yes.
still happening. It's not just
Mhm.
history. If any um, friend or acquaintance of yours says, "Well, slavery was a long time ago," it's like, well, yes, it was a terrible, hideous crime of a long time ago, and various forms of it are still continuing.
Yes, the
And
repercussions of it are still felt today.
right,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
deliberate repercussions.
Yes.
When the Civil Rights Act was signed, then new ways to disenfranchise voters and other things were deliberately crafted so that Black people were always below. That
Mhm.
was there are people, I may not be one of them, but there are literally people who said, oh, well, if they're going to give Black people the vote, then we have to do this to keep Black people down. And they would do it on purpose. So there
Well,
is purpose.
mhm.
Yeah, there's
Well,
intention.
we're still there because literally
Right.
hundreds of bills have been introduced since after this past election in order to suppress the Black vote
Yes.
again in
Again.
2021. Yes.
And the number of those bills is absolutely shocking. Even
Yes.
though 60 plus courts, including the Supreme Court, said there was no voter fraud with
Right.
any significant numbers. It just didn't happen. All the
Hmm.
way to the Supreme Court declared that.
Hmm.
And still, there's people trying to make new laws to see that there's no voter fraud, which
Hmm.
is code. I'm
Well,
sorry.
hmm.
It's code word for we don't want so many Black people voting. We got to cut them out somehow.
Yes.
And that's
Hmm.
that's part of the American nightmare for Black people to experience.
Yes. And I think that's part of now that I would say, well, I don't know. That is a specific group of people who have absolutely zero desire to lose power, who have absolutely zero desire for anything equitable to become of our country, and they have zero desire of equality. Period. They wish to remain in charge, preferably male, always white. Let's keep the patriarchy what we want it to be. That is exactly what that is. And we saw that. That was so clear and so evident to me on January 6th. That was not a fluke. Those were people saying, this is my possessive country, and I refuse to let you participate in it or change it. That's
Right.
exactly what that statement was being said.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
I
We don't
saw
appreciate that statement.
what's that?
I said, we don't appreciate that statement, but that's what it
No,
was. Mhm.
no. And maybe it's a little detour, but I did see a comment go by this week said, if my president, Joe Biden, told me to go attack the Capitol, I wouldn't go attack the Capitol. I'd say, what's wrong with you for saying that?
Right.
Which struck
Mhm.
me as right on.
Mhm.
So, okay, I'm getting a low battery here,
Ah,
Bernadette. We're going to have to quit.
all right. Well, thank you for watching this week. Please comment, like, and subscribe. Well, there's her face again. We look forward to talking to you next week. So until then, start talking and keep talking. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.